The moment the auctioneer's gavel struck the podium, a sound echoed that wasn't wood on wood but a whisper, trembling from the lips of a girl who hadn't spoken in 3 years. "Daddy, did you see that?" she said softly, her hand still clutching the now empty jar of coins, and outside, where no one looked, a breeze stirred the silver badge nailed beside her front door. It didn't chime, didn't shine, but it moved. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Whispering Pines, Colorado, lay quiet under a veil of pale snow. The morning was cold but gentle, with gray skies stretching low over the mountain town, along the pine-lined main street. The townspeople moved with slow anticipation, most of them converging on the grand but time-worn community hall at its center. It was auction day, a yearly event that usually meant baked goods, gift baskets, and the occasional antique rifle. But this year, something different was on the docket, something that made the air feel heavier. Inside the wooden-paneled hall, Sadie Whitmore sat quietly between her mother and her grandfather. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with pale cheeks and long, copper-colored hair braided neatly down her back. Her eyes, light hazel like melted honey, rarely blinked, and she almost never spoke, not since the day her father died 3 years ago. In her lap sat a large mason jar, filled to the top with coins, pennies, nickels, quarters. A few faded dollar bills curled along the inside glass. She had counted them all the night before, 437,082ers. But that wasn't what made them precious. Each coin marked a day without her father. Deputy Jack Whitmore, a man who had once filled every room with the sound of laughter, boots, and the soft jingle of a badge. The badge now hung in Sadie's bedroom, polished every Sunday morning, a silver reminder of everything she had lost. Today, they were auctioning Cody Jack's canine partner, a golden retriever with a calm presence and fur the color of wheat in sunlight. Cody was 7 years old, retired from duty, but still strong, his eyes bright and alert. For the past 3 years, he had been held in department care. No one had said why Cody wasn't given to the family, and Sadie had never asked. But she had saved every coin, every moment, waiting for the chance to bring him home. Tom Whitmore sat silently on Sadie's other side, Jack's father. Once the sheriff of Whispering Pines, was a man carved out of hard seasons. His hair had turned silver early, his jaw remained strong, and his silence was the kind that spoke volumes. In the 3 years since his son's death, he had never once spoken of what happened. He simply withdrew into the barn, the woods, the shed out back where he kept old radios and broken memories. Today, for the first time in a long while, he wore his dress coat. The old badge glinted on his chest like a ghost. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called, his voice bouncing against the rafters. "Up next, we have K9 Officer Cody, Golden Retriever, age 7, trained in narcotics detection, tracking, and basic search and rescue." Sadie sat straighter, tightening her grip on the jar. A few people in the crowd looked at Cody with curiosity. A couple of men in uniforms stood at the back, arms folded. An older woman took out her phone to snap a picture. None of them noticed the girl in the third row, her feet barely touching the floor. Tom didn't look at her, but his fingers, calloused and cracked, brushed briefly against her shoulder. A small gesture, a silent vow, The auctioneer began opening bid. $2,000. Sadie didn't raise a hand. She simply looked at Cody. He sat still, ears forward, eyes scanning the crowd. But when his gaze found Sadie, he stopped. His head tilted, just slightly. His tail made a single soft thump against the floor. And Sadie, who hadn't spoken in years, blinked slowly once. Her mother, Lauren, reached over and placed a hand on Sadie's knee. There were no words between them, only breath. Tom watched the dog, watched the girl, and somewhere behind his weathered face, something cracked, not broken, but softened, in his mind. He heard Jack's voice again, laughing, calling the dog, holding his daughter, promising to come home. He hadn't told anyone the truth about Jack's final night, not even Lauren, especially not Sadie. But as the bidding began $3,000, then $4,500, Tom felt the weight of silence pressing heavier against his ribs. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't move. He just watched his granddaughter, holding a jar of hope, and wondered if today was the day he stopped running from the truth. The snow outside had thickened, blurring the edges of whispering pines in a curtain of quiet. From inside the town hall's high windows, it looked like the world had been erased into white. But within, the stillness was quickly giving way to murmurs and disbelief. Sadie's eyes stayed on Cody as the bidding escalated. Her hands, still wrapped tightly around the mason jar, trembled. The number on the board, $35,000, had already passed everything she and her family could dream of, when the auctioneer called out $40,000 from bidder 21. A hush fell over the room. The bidder was a tall man seated in the third row, Ethan Blake. Ethan Blake wore wealth the way others wore winter coats easily, without noticing its weight. Mid-40s, lean and clean-shaven. His tailored navy coat was too sharp for a town like this. His salt and pepper hair was combed with intention, and his steel-gray eyes scanned the room with the calm precision of someone who had never lost. Known to some in Whispering Pines, though not well-liked. Ethan was the owner of multiple security firms in Colorado and Montana. His presence here was unexpected and unwelcome by many. Sadie didn't know who he was, but Cody did. The dog stiffened, ears twitching back as if in warning. He made a low, barely audible whine, something between confusion and unease. Officer Reynolds, a stocky man in his early 50s with a gentle demeanor and thick mustache, held Cody's leash tightly. Reynolds had known Jack, trained Cody alongside him. He leaned down slightly. "Easy, buddy," he muttered, noticing the shift. Sadie, her cheeks blotchy with held-in emotion, looked to her mother. Lauren tried to speak, but no sound came out. She reached to take the jar from Sadie's lap, as if to protect her from further heartbreak. And then it happened, before the auctioneer could call it done. A quiet but clear voice rose from the back of the hall. 60,000. Heads turned. Some stood. Even Ethan Blake twisted slightly in his seat, his posture suddenly less relaxed, standing near the rear doorway, partially shadowed by the old wooden beams. Was Caleb Bryant. Caleb looked out of place amid the polished shoes and polished manners. He wore a canvas ranch coat, edges weathered from years in the wind. His jeans were scuffed, boots muddy. A thick scarf was wrapped around his neck, and his gray-blonde hair spilled from beneath a bent-brim Stetson. He was tall, quiet, and stood like a man who had carried weight too long to be surprised by much. Few in town had seen him in public for years. Rumors swirled of loss, of withdrawal, but no one really knew why Caleb Bryant had vanished into his ranch near the edge of Silver Meadow. Tom Whitmore's breath caught in his chest. the name, the posture, the voice he hadn't seen Caleb in almost a decade. The auctioneer, clearly shaken, cleared his throat. 60,000 from bidder 33. Do I hear 70? Blake remained seated, unmoving, going once. The man called, his voice cracking with tension. Twice, sold. The gavel came down like the crack of a spine. Sadie didn't understand. She hadn't won, but neither had the stranger who made Cody uneasy. Her heart was a tangle of relief and confusion. Cody, as if sensing the shift, let out a soft exhale, sitting back on his haunches. He looked directly at Caleb from the third row. Tom finally stood. Not fast, his knees didn't allow it, but firmly. He turned to look back at the man who had just dropped 60 grand on a retired K9. Their eyes met. It was Caleb who spoke first, with a nod as small as a memory. "Hello, Sheriff?" Tom's jaw flexed. Not anymore. Lauren looked between them. "You know him?" Tom didn't answer right away. He rubbed a calloused hand over his chin, eyes still fixed on the man in the doorway. "I did," he said eventually. "A long time ago, back when the snow hadn't been so heavy, back when Jack was still alive." Tom had trained Caleb personally when he was just out of academy young, sharp-minded, with a touch of recklessness that made him brilliant in the field. He and Jack had worked cases together, some deeper than paperwork would admit. Then, during a narcotics operation just before Jack's death, Caleb had disappeared from the department, left without explanation. Just gone. Tom had always assumed grief had swallowed him whole, but now, seeing Caleb again, something in Tom shifted. He wasn't just here by accident. Tom stepped outside after the auction ended, letting the snow dust his shoulders. A few moments later, Caleb followed. "You didn't come for the dog," Tom said quietly. "I did," Caleb replied. "But not only. No." Tom narrowed his eyes. Jack Caleb didn't answer. He simply stared out across the snowy field behind the Hall Silver Meadow, where Jack and he had chased a suspect for the last time, where lines blurred and trust had cracked. "I couldn't stop what happened," Caleb said at last. "But I can make sure it's not buried." Tom looked down at the snow-covered grass, fists clenched at his sides. Inside, Sadie was sitting again. Cody had been led back to the rear holding area for temporary processing, but his eyes had stayed on her until the last possible moment. Lauren leaned over, brushing hair from Sadie's face. "You did everything you could. Sweetheart." Sadie looked up for a moment. Lauren thought she might speak, but she didn't. Back outside, Caleb adjusted his hat. "You still live on Whisper Creek Road?" Tom nodded. "You coming by? I'll bring him tomorrow." Tom studied him. "Why now?" Caleb took a long breath. "Because your son never stopped trusting people, even when he should have. I owe that trust something." Tom watched him walk away, boots crunching over new snow. The ghost of Jack Whitmore lingered there between them, no longer silent. The morning mist clung low to the hills as the truck rumbled down the gravel path, leading to Silver Hollow Ranch. Frost had settled overnight on the brittle grass, and the sun, barely rising over the pines, cast the world in soft amber light. Lauren Whitmore tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the wooden gate came into view. Her daughter, Sadie, sat silently in the passenger seat, the jar of coins gone now, but her small fingers clutched around the strap of her backpack like it still held everything. They hadn't spoken much during the drive, but words had never been a requirement between them. Lauren's expression was composed, though the corners of her mouth had drawn tighter since the auction. The invitation to come see Cody again had come as a surprise. Caleb Bryant hadn't said much when he called, just that it was important Sadie see Cody again, and that he had something to show them. The ranch came into full view as they crested the last hill. It was tucked between pine ridges, with 2 weathered barns, a wide front porch, and a corral that opened to the meadow beyond. Horses grazed in the distance, their silhouettes sharp against the melting frost. A black truck sat parked to the side, and a golden blur bolted across the open field toward the drive. Sadie sat forward instantly, eyes wide. It was Cody. He raced with the loose-limbed joy of a dog that had waited too long. His golden coat bounced in the wind, and as Lauren brought the car to a halt, Sadie flung the door open before it fully stopped. Cody met her in a heap of limbs and fur, his tail slapping against the dirt as Sadie buried her face in his neck. Lauren stepped out more slowly. Her boots crunched on the frost-bitten ground as she watched the reunion unfold. A familiar ache stirred in her chest, not pain. Exactly, but a weight made of memory and time. Caleb emerged from the barn. He was dressed in his usual ranch coat, gloves tucked into his belt, and his hat pulled low against the morning sun. A faint smile traced his face, not reaching all the way to his eyes. He approached with a nod. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning." Lauren replied. Her voice was polite, but cautious. "She missed him," Caleb said, eyes drifting to Sadie, who was now walking in circles with Cody at her side like they'd never been apart. "I can tell," Lauren said. Caleb led her toward the porch, where a tin kettle steamed gently atop a small stove. "I appreciate you coming," he said, pouring coffee into 2 enamel cups. Lauren accepted hers but didn't drink. "You said there was something you wanted to show us." Caleb hesitated. His expression shifted, as if he'd spent the night deciding whether to share what he was about to share. "I found something," he said finally, "in a box I hadn't touched in years. It belonged to Jack." Lauren's heart stopped. Caleb pulled a small metal tin from the coat rack near the door. It was scuffed and dented, the kind of container soldiers and officers used to store letters they couldn't bear to throw away. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in Jack's handwriting. He handed it to Lauren, who stared at the familiar slant of the letters before opening it. Her hands trembled. Sadie remained with Cody in the distance, unaware, surrounded by the soft glow of the meadow. The letter was dated 4 months before Jack died. It was addressed to Caleb, though it had clearly never been mailed. "Caleb, I know you said to let it go, but I can't. There's something wrong with the shipments coming through Whispering Point. Not just the volume, what's inside. Unregistered pain meds, opioids, mislabeled. I traced it back to a firm with ties to Ethan Blake. It's not just side business, it's a pipeline. I know what this means. I know who might come looking. If anything happens, don't let it die with me." Jack Lauren read it twice, the second time. The words sank deeper. Her face paled. "I never saw this," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you should," Caleb said, "but after seeing Blake at the auction, I thought maybe it was time." Lauren stared into the meadow. Sadie and Cody were now lying in the grass together, their heads pressed close, eyes closed against the sun. "Do you believe he was killed for this?" she asked, her voice nearly broken. "I think Jack found something he wasn't supposed to. I think someone made sure he couldn't speak about it again. Back in town." Tom Whitmore stepped into the Whispering Pines archives, a quiet, mostly forgotten room in the back of the sheriff's office. now repurposed as a storeroom for old files and dust. He wore a simple wool coat and carried no badge, but the receptionist at the front desk didn't stop him. His name still meant something here. The room smelled of paper and mildew. Rows of cabinets lined the walls, most unlabeled. Tom moved slowly, methodically. He hadn't looked through these folders in years, but Jack's name appeared too many times for him to ignore. He found the incident report, his son's final case. It was thin, too thin. Tom's brow furrowed. The timeline was inconsistent. Names were redacted. The transport logs were incomplete. A name appeared again and again in the margins under pseudonyms, under import records, under fund transfers. E. Blake. Tom closed the folder and sat down heavily in the nearest chair. A truth he had buried with uniformed precision was surfacing, rough-edged and raw. He had accepted the official story because it was cleaner, but clean had never been honest. Back at the ranch. The sun climbed higher. Sadie napped against Cody's side, breathing steady. Lauren placed the letter back in the tin and closed it. "What are you going to do with this?" she asked Caleb. "That depends," he said. "On what?" "On whether you think Jack's truth deserves to live." Lauren looked toward her daughter, asleep against the dog that had once followed her husband through storms and standoffs. "He's all she has left of Jack," she said. "And maybe this is how we bring part of him back." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we start here." Snowmelt ran in silver threads along the gutters of Whispering Pines as the sun returned after days of cloud. The air was sharp with thawing pine and the smoke of nearby fireplaces. The town hall, usually reserved for fall fairs and voting booths, had been prepared for something far less celebratory, an emergency town hearing. Folding chairs lined the parquet floor, each filled with a curious resident or a wary official. At the front, behind a wide oak table, sat 3 council members, their faces marked with equal parts fatigue and unease. Sadie Whitmore sat in the front row beside her mother. Her boots didn't quite touch the floor, and her hands were folded carefully in her lap. Cody lay curled at her feet, his head resting atop her shoes like they were his post. He looked up every few seconds. Scanning the room with quiet vigilance, Caleb Bryant stood not far behind them, arms crossed, his broad frame taking up nearly the full width of the aisle. His coat was clean but worn, boots muddy from the walk into town. A scar ran along his left forearm, faded and pale, an old wound from an older mission. He said little, as always, but when he spoke, people listened. Lauren sat to Sadie's right, her back straight, lips pressed tight. She wore a dark gray sweater over her old blue coat, and her hair had been pinned back with quiet determination. She hadn't spoken to the press, nor answered the string of calls that began after word spread of Ethan Blake's name being tied to Jack's last investigation. Today, she had come for truth, not headlines. Tom Whitmore arrived a few minutes late, dressed in a simple sheriff's jacket, though the badge was no longer his, in his hand, a manila folder fat, dog-eared, heavy with documents no one had wanted to reopen. His face was calm, but his eyes were resolute. The room shifted when Ethan Blake entered. He wore a 3-piece charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, his tie the color of spilled ink, his hair, always styled, gleamed under the hall's lighting. He walked with the assurance of someone who assumed the room belonged to him. Flanking him were 2 men in long coats, his legal team, and 1 younger woman carrying a briefcase. Her heels clicking like a metronome of power, Councilwoman Denise Harland, a woman in her late 60s with silver curls pulled into a severe bun. Banged her gavel once. We're here to discuss the recent accusations levied against Mr. Blake, and the custody request regarding retired K-9 Cody. Caleb stepped forward first. I won Cody at the auction, but I didn't do it to keep him. I did it because this dog doesn't belong in the hands of a man like Ethan Blake. Gasps rustled across the room like wind through dry grass. Blake raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Caleb continued. Jack Whitmore was my partner. He died trying to uncover something dark, something connected to the distribution of unmarked opioids through this town's logistics chain. Cody was trained to detect those substances. Blake's companies were named in the preliminary findings. That investigation was never completed because Jack never came home. Councilman Ray Holloway, bald with a permanent frown, leaned forward. Do you have proof? Tom stood, voice gravelly but steady. Yes, sir, we do. He moved to the front and laid down the folder. These are internal memos, shipping logs, and a letter Jack wrote before he died. We also have statements from Caleb Bryant, who left the force after realizing his own chain of command had been compromised. One of Blake's lawyers, a thin man with sharp features and a Harvard pin on his lapel. Rose, this is deeply inappropriate. Mr. Blake has not been formally charged with any crime. The custody of a dog does not warrant this kind of show trial. Tom glanced back at Sadie, then down at Cody, who had begun to shift restlessly. This isn't about a dog, he said. It's about what that dog remembers. Blake leaned back, finally speaking. You're suggesting a retired animal is going to testify. Then he stood and stepped forward, his voice smooth. I understand grief makes people desperate, but I assure you, there is no conspiracy. I was bidding on Cody because he was an exceptional working dog. My company uses K-9 units for security at high-risk facilities. That is all. As he passed by the first row, he glanced briefly at Sadie, something in his gaze cool. Assessing made the girl instinctively lean closer to Cody. Cody stood, his ears pinned back. His hackles rose. A low growl built in his chest. Cody, Lauren whispered, stay. But the dog didn't stay. In a single fluid motion, Cody surged forward, planting himself between Blake and Sadie, teeth bared, not vicious, but defensive. Blake froze mid-step. The room went still. Tom stepped beside the dog and rested a hand on his back. He's been trained not to react unless there's reason. Sadie didn't move, but her eyes, soft, wide, were locked on Cody's tail, which wagged once, gently, as if to say, I'm here. Councilwoman Harland banged her gavel again. That's enough. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Blake, your request for custody of this animal is denied. Furthermore, given the new documents and today's events, I'm motioning to formally reopen the investigation into Deputy Jack Whitmore's death. Lauren let out a shaky breath. Caleb nodded once, quietly. Sadie bent over and wrapped her arms around Cody's neck. The vote passed unanimously. As the room emptied, one by one, reporters began asking questions, but no one in the Whitmore family answered. Not yet. Out in the hallway, Caleb pulled Tom aside. You did the right thing. Tom exhaled. Took me long enough. From behind them, Sadie's small voice floated down the hall. Grandpa Tom turned. She looked up, then held out her hand. He took it. The sky above whispering pines was a pale, endless blue, as if the storm that had hung over the town for years had finally cleared. The snowbanks were receding, and the first green tips of wild grass peeked through along the edges of Silver Meadow. Spring hadn't fully arrived, but its promise was already in the air. inside the old town hall. The same space that once held whispers of suspicion now resonated with a quiet, reverent kind of hope. Town officials, families, and a few press members had gathered for the final announcement. No microphones, no cameras, just people who had lived through loss, watched a small girl fight in silence, and witnessed a dog remind an entire town what loyalty looked like. At the front of the room, Councilwoman Denise Harland, her usual severity softened by the weeks past, stood behind the podium. Her gray curls framed her face, and a small pin, a silver badge, glinted at her collar. In light of recent developments, she began, and under the unanimous vote of this council, Whispering Pines formally recognizes Cody as a certified therapeutic canine companion. Applause followed. Quiet but warm, Sadie sat with Cody at her feet, one hand resting in the thick of his golden fur. Her braid was neater today, her cheeks a little rosier. She wore a dress with blue daisies, the same one she had worn to Jack's funeral 3 years before, but now it looked like something new. A beginning, not an echo. Tom Whitmore stood at the back, a few steps behind Lauren. His coat was slung over one shoulder, and his eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, were clear, almost light, over the past week. He had spent hours working with the legal team from Denver who had taken on Jack's reopened case. He had testified under oath. He had signed the affidavit. He had finally, painfully, let the truth breathe. Ethan Blake was no longer in town. 2 days after the hearing, he was indicted on federal charges related to the illegal distribution of narcotics across state lines. The documents Jack had compiled, once dismissed, were now front-page news. Caleb Bryant had submitted his own testimony as part of a larger internal investigation. Whispering Pines, a town not built for scandal, found itself in the middle of one. And somehow it held its ground. Lauren knelt beside Sadie as the announcement ended. "You okay?" she whispered. Sadie nodded. Denise Harland smiled as she stepped away from the podium. "Sadie," she called gently, "would you like to say anything?" There was a stillness in the room. Even the chairs seemed to hush. Sadie stood slowly. Her fingers curled tighter in Cody's fur for a second, then released. She took a single step forward, then another. Cody followed, stopping beside her like a silent sentinel. The girl looked out at the crowd. Her lips parted, and for the first time in 3 years. Her voice rang clear. "Cody helped me find Daddy again." The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of tears. Breath held too long, hearts broken and now mending. Lauren covered her mouth. Tom looked down, blinking fast. Caleb, standing near the door, tilted his hat low across his brow, but not before a tear rolled down one weather-lined cheek. Later that afternoon, the Whitmore family walked up the gravel path to their home. The air smelled like pine bark and warm earth. Sadie held Cody's leash. Though he barely needed it, he stayed close, trotting at her side like he had always been there. On the porch hung a wind chime made of keys and old bottle caps. Sadie had made it with Jack one summer before everything changed. Beside the front door, on a small wooden hook, hung Jack's badge. Tom reached out and touched it. Lauren unlocked the door and stepped inside first. Letting sunlight spill across the hardwood floor, the living room was simple photos lined the mantel. Most of Jack, some of Sadie. A pair of boots still sat beside the door. Cody walked in, sniffed once, then lay on the rug with a heavy, contented sigh. Sadie walked over to the window. Outside, Silver Meadow shimmered faintly in the late afternoon light. "Grandpa?" she asked without turning. Tom looked over. She pointed. "Do you think Daddy would have wanted Cody to stay here?" Tom's voice was quiet, but certain. "I think he'd say Cody was always meant to be here." They stood in silence. The family, now complete in its own way, not healed, not whole, but together, on the porch. The wind shifted. The silver badge glinted, catching the light one last time before the sun slipped below the hills. Sometimes. The greatest miracles are not found in sudden wonders, but in the quiet return of hope, a child's first word after years of silence, a dog finding his way home, a family choosing truth over comfort. This story reminds us that healing often arrives in the form of loyalty, love, and the courage to keep believing, even when the world seems to have gone silent. We believe it wasn't just chance that brought Cody back. It was something higher, a quiet answer from God to a little girl's unspoken prayer, a reminder that even in our darkest valleys, He never leaves us alone. In your everyday life, don't ignore the small signs of grace. Maybe your miracle is waiting in a gentle nudge, a loyal friend, or a door that opens when you least expect it. If this story moved your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe God still works in unseen, beautiful ways. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, love, and second chances. And may God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and healing.